Um, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bikram Basu. I'm a partner at LEK Consulting, and I focus on transport and logistics. And I spend more and more of my time helping clients understand the challenges and opportunities coming from decarbonization. Um, Today, I'm going to spend some time sharing with you insights from our global mobility survey. It's a survey that's been running for about 7 years, and we've been running it pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and obviously until now. And it's unique in that it's a longitudinal study, and we've been asking questions consistently across a number of countries about how attitudes are changing towards mobility. And we think that this helps to understand how things are changing in people's mindsets. And I'm going to go through 5 issues which I think will help you understand how things are developing in terms of electrification. So the first thing is I'll describe how the energy transition is going to be really the next big disruption in mobility. It's already gone through a number of disruptions over the last few years, but there will be new winners and losers. I'll describe how the pandemic itself has accelerated people's positive sentiment towards electrification and green forms of transport. But despite that positive sentiment, there's still lots of barriers to EV adoption. I'll explore that in a bit more. Um, and there are some lessons to learn from other economies. So I think Norway is a good example. Norway is much more advanced in terms of its EV adoption. And I'll draw some insights that have come from surveys and work that we've done there. And finally, then I'll just share my thoughts on what the new winners and losers, who they may be in the energy transition. So just kind of painting a quick history of disruption in mobility over the last 5 or 6 years. Pre-pandemic, there was a lot of talk about these new business models, Uber disrupting taxi companies. There was all the car sharing and micromobility that was then going to change people's attitudes to owning vehicles. So the big winners there were Uber, micromobility and car sharing apps, and the losers there were taxi companies and maybe the OEMs. And then the pandemic happened, and things changed. Obviously, we had lockdown, we had people working from home, people were changing the way they were kind of going out, so they couldn't go out, so they were staying in instead. And really, the winners there were Amazon, Netflix, cycling, and the big losers were aviation and mass transport. So if you now look at post-pandemic and we look at what things are happening today, there's still quite a few disruptive things happening. We've got inflation. Hopefully that's short-lived, but inflation is a key topic at the moment. There's hybrid working, and there's also this acceleration of the energy transition. So who will be the new winners and losers? So let's just look at some of the survey results. So on the left is actually data from Google, and it's looking at how search terms for sustainability-related terms have changed. And you can see that there's a huge spike post-pandemic on people searching up sustainability terms. And on the right is data from our survey itself, which asks people how their interest in green forms of transport have changed across our surveyed countries. And you can see an equivalent uplift in people's interest, stated interest in green forms of transport, including EVs. And that spike in interest has resulted in huge spike in EV sales. So on the left is the data on EV sales pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, and that's pretty consistent across all our surveyed countries. And in some countries, we've seen a 5x, 6x increase in the sale of EVs. And equivalently for those same countries on the right are some results from our survey, which asks people, how willing are you to pay more for an EV? And the findings there are, it shows that people are, there's a significant minority of people who are willing to pay more for an EV. And in some countries, it's actually a majority. So, for example, Spain. So a huge amount of positive sentiment. I wouldn't say it's all because of the pandemic. I think the pandemic may have helped. But there's a confluence of factors there. There's the fact that sustainability has gone up the political agenda. In addition to that, the EV market has actually matured. There are more models available. The performance of models has improved. And also there's various green stimulus packages that have gone in post-pandemic that's helping to drive the move towards electric vehicles. So despite all this positive sentiment, there's still quite a few barriers to adoption. And I think if you want to see EVs get to mass adoption, there's quite a few things that need to be addressed. So this data from the survey shows for a select number of countries the reasons why people are not buying EVs. And you can see that cost is the key concern. It was a concern pre-pandemic, and it's still a concern. And that's despite people saying that they're willing to pay more. There's a question about how much more. But I think what's really interesting is what's changed in the second and third concern. And that's evolved to a point where I think what it indicates is pre-pandemic, the issue was cost, but also the question was, are EVs suitable for me to be my primary vehicle? Is the range enough? Do I have availability for, for a charger at home or a public charger? But what's changed, I think, in the survey post-pandemic is that the mindset has changed to being, well, actually, rather than worrying about whether an EV is suitable, it's more about what are the implications of being an EV owner. So I'm more concerned about the battery life. What happens if I try to sell my EV? What happens when I need to kind of recycle my EV? And so we start to see things like battery life and come up the concerns. And also, although it's not one of the top three concerns, recycling an EV has been one of the things that's come out from the survey. So I think what we're seeing is people's mindset is changing towards, look, I'm going to have to own an EV at some point. It's more a matter of when rather than if. So there's a changing mindset in terms of the barriers to adoption, but also in the short term, we've seen a bit of a blip in the relative cost of electricity and petrol and diesel. If you look at the total cost of ownership, so that's what TCO means in case you're not familiar with that acronym. An EV is typically much cheaper to run in terms of per mile for electricity versus petrol, but that equation has changed somewhat in some countries, especially in the UK. You can see that electricity prices have gone up by 60% over that since 2021, whereas petrol has gone up by 25%. So that's changed the TCO, balance between EVs and ICE vehicles. That's not the case in every country. So in the United States, it's the other way around. So that, in my mind, could change a bit the way people look at the equation of whether an EV is cheaper or not. But as long as the wholesale prices do come down in electricity, then hopefully that's a short-run thing and that will abate over time. And I think the other thing that's changing that's quite important is the expectation for performance versus actual performance. So EV ranges are improving. They're improving quite consistently, and we should see that improve more as battery technology is improving. There's a few other new battery technologies that will be coming into the market in the near future. But what we're seeing is that the expected performance and the actual performance are starting to converge. So what this data shows is in the United Kingdom, the median range of vehicles available on the market is about 340 kilometers. And that will satisfy about 65% of the population in terms of the range that they would need from a vehicle. And that's a similar level to the United States, but there are some countries that are a bit more fussy about their range, such as France. So what we should see is that as the battery technology improves, more and more people will feel comfortable with buying an EV for its range. And I think on the other side of the equation is also making charger availability much more widespread will also help that problem. Here's some data on EV charging infrastructure. So just to take that point a bit further, and I'm comparing Norway with the UK here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Norway is perhaps the leader in EV adoption. And at the moment, if you include plug-in hybrids, it's about 25% of the fleet in Norway is EV or plug-in hybrids. Compare that with the UK, it's about just over 2%. Now, from the outset, it looks like there's quite a lot of chargers in the UK, but there aren't that many fast chargers yet. But per head of population, it's still significantly behind Norway. So I think what this is showing is that as EV adoption increases, we need to make sure that the charger network also increases with EV adoption. So we can't keep our foot. We need to keep our foot on the accelerator with both things. So we can't let one move ahead of the other. And I think also it's very important that we're very intelligent about where we put charging infrastructure. I think one advantage of electricity is that you can put it in lots of different places. There's obviously some infrastructure that needs to go into that, but it's a bit easier to put electricity in some places than it is to build out petrol stations in some cases. But I think one thing that would be helpful is for us to look at where cars spend their time. And looking at the dwell time of cars is one way of looking at this. So there's this often famous stat that cars spend 95% of their time doing nothing. So this is what this data is showing. So there's plenty of places where cars are just still and could be charged. So it could be off-street parking, it could be at work, it could be shopping centres. So there's lots of opportunities to put in charging in places that are convenient where the car is going to be parked anyway. So I think it's helpful then to just turn our attention to Norway and look at what lessons we can learn from Norway. As I mentioned before, Norway is to some extent 8-9 years ahead of most Western European countries in terms of EV penetration. And there are three lessons that we've kind of drawn out. The first thing is about subsidies, and I think the key thing here is that subsidies have been pretty critical to rapid EV adoption in Norway. I think that in itself is not that insightful. Subsidies do work, but they really did work in Norway. And I think what's interesting is the package of subsidies that were offered. So it's not just about getting the price point down, but it's also providing subsidies for tax, for tolls, for parking. And I think when you put in lots of components to the subsidy, it reminds people that there are lots of different advantages to owning an EV, and that certainly helped in Norway to the extent where buying an e-Golf versus buying a petrol-driven Golf it was almost cost neutral. The second point then in the middle is about the role of public fast charging. And what we found is, certainly in Norway and in most countries, is that the early adopters of EVs are typically more wealthy, but they also have a home with a drive and they can put in home charging. And sometimes the EV is a second vehicle rather than their primary vehicle, so they can rely on their petrol and diesel car for some journeys as well. But if we really want to see mass adoption of EVs, we will need public charging, because in the end, people who have a car, live in an apartment, will need public charging to rely on. And certainly in Norway, we've seen that as the penetration of EVs has increased, the usage of public charging has also increased significantly. So that's pretty critical to mass adoption. And then the final one is about forecourt fast charging. So there's some data out there that shows how people in Norway have been using fast charging in a forecourt style. And I think the key observation here is that people are quite impatient. If they've got nothing to do, they wait for, on average, 20 minutes to charge. Even if their car is not fully charged, that's kind of the limit of their patience. So they then charge for 20 minutes and then move on. So in terms of fast charging locations, we'd say that an observation there is that the faster the charger, so the higher rated the charger, the more that you can deliver. And also, in our view, that will also command a premium in the market. So those are three things that we kind of observed from Norway, and I think those things should translate quite well into other Western markets. So what does this all mean in the end? And who will be the new winners and losers? I think there are three things to look out for in terms of mass adoption of EVs. One is costs. So can I afford to buy an EV? And as we showed in the survey, costs are still very important, and that's one of the key barriers to adoption. So there is unmet demand for cheap EVs, and any low-cost EV OEMs should do very well add to the market. Losers are potentially OEMs who have a limited EV product range. I think what you see is that the car market is very sophisticated, it's very segmented. People like certain types of vehicles. And if they don't have an electric version of that vehicle, then they may hold on to their ICE vehicle instead or go to another brand. So the proliferation of brands is and marques and models is quite important as well. Second thing about infrastructure, I think, as we showed from the survey, actual performance of EVs is converging with consumer expectations, but still the availability of public charging and fast charging will be very important. So I think locations which have a natural dwell time, as we showed before, there are lots of locations that could be, can create new revenue sources. I think the losers in the end could be the forecourts, because a lot of what was sold through forecourts will now be either at home or shopping centres and other locations. And the final one is about risk of ownership. And I think here this is about people not being convinced yet about the total cost of ownership, people a bit wary about the residual value. What I mean by that is, how much can I sell my vehicle for? Or even the leasing companies who are still not sure how much an EV will be worth in 3 or 4 years' time, and then not really understanding how best to price the leasing in the first place. And I think this is where the EV market can take a leaf from the commercial market, where the commercial market, such as electric buses, they've introduced as-a-service models, which are trying to package all of these items together. So the energy sourcing, the charging infrastructure, battery replacement and maintenance, and packaging it all up in a way that you know exactly what you're paying for every month. And that could help unlock some of this, I guess, anxiety about how much does it cost to run, how much will it be worth when I sell it. And again, I think helping people over that hump of the high capex in terms of buying an EV, but lower running costs. How do you convince people to make the switch? Well, as a service can help them do that and finance it over a longer period of time. So I think what we could see is anyone who comes up with innovative finance options could win here. And secondly, those who understand residual values of EVs will also be winners here, because they can work out how best to price leasing products in the market. So that's it from me. There is more from our survey that's available online. So if you're interested to learn more about some of the findings in there, there's a lot more stuff that we do cover off. You can visit the webinar online, and also we have the materials available. Thank you very much.